morning, Wellhouse at Home. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Meredith, and before we get started, I just want to tell you a quick little story, something I've been thinking about a lot the past couple weeks. So several weeks ago, Mom and I had a conversation where she took me to a pasture that she had driven by, and she just said, throughout the Bible, Jesus calls us sheep. And she pointed over the pasture, and there were several sheep. And she said, but sheep are gross and dirty and not clean, and they really kind of smell. So why does Jesus call us that? But yet in the storybooks, you see a picture of a sheep, and it's this beautiful, white, pure-looking animal. But that's not the reality. And I thought, that's true. Probably because so often we want to be the storybook sheep. We want to be spotless and blameless and pure, but we're not. We're dirty, and a lot of times we kind of smell pretty bad. But then this week I was looking at a video, and in the background of the video there were two lambs. There's an adult sheep and then the lamb. And the adult was just like the sheep that we saw in the pasture. Dirty, gross, smelled probably. And then the lamb was white as snow. She was gorgeous and clean and just spotless. And I thought, wow, that reminds me of Matthew 18. In verse 3 it says, truly I tell you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. That's a little bit daunting. You will never enter the kingdom of heaven. But what that means is that you will never enter the kingdom of heaven unless you become like that baby lamb. And how do you do that? You enter into a relationship with Jesus. He enters in and he makes you pure, blameless, spotless, white as snow, just like the baby lamb. So maybe you think about that this week and something in your heart stirs. But for now, let's get to worship.
Turning lives around. see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 'Cause you are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness, my God, that is who you are. 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 That is who you are.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire. In darkest nights, you are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good.
Hey, what's up, Well House? Friends, partners, community. Hope you guys have had a fabulous week and got some things done and been productive. I know, like many of you, man, I'm just longing for people. I'm ready to see people, and but it has been really cool to interact with a lot of you through social media over the last couple of weeks, and continue to do that. And so, hopefully, you're enjoying some of our midweek devotional stuff and some other posts that's just trying to engage. And so, we're excited about that. In addition to what we're doing together here on Sunday. And so we're going to finish up Soul Detox today, and we're excited about this. But let me go ahead and tell you so you can brace yourself. We kind of saved not just the best one, we saved the toughest one for last. So today is going to really kind of challenge us. And so I hope you lean into the challenge instead of pulling away or getting about halfway through and go, hey, you know what? I can hit the end button here and kind of be done with this. So stay with me through this one. I think that this one is going to set us up again for just approaching our lives with just a real pure heart before God. And so you'll kind of see as we go what I'm talking about on it being tough. So I want to pray for us, and then we'll dive in this morning. So Father, this morning, in the midst of a challenging lesson, we just pray that you will open our hearts and our minds to go towards the direction that I know that you have created us to go. And so in these moments where there's some real tough evaluation that might need to happen or will happen, I pray that you pull us into a sense of belonging and longing and yearning for you. And so, Father, just be with us this morning as we kind of dive in together and figure out where our hearts belong and who they belong to. We pray this through your Son's name. Amen. Back a few years ago, I got to travel to Africa with my dad, and it was an amazing trip. We went to Tanzania and just some amazing people and culture and scenery. But one of the things that stands out to me most is we were traveling from village to village, and along the way, there was this roadside zoo that we came across. And the thing that caught our eye was it said camel riding. And I thought, ooh, that'd be kind of cool, like to ride a camel. I mean, it's not something I get to do in Nashville, Tennessee. I can ride a pedal tavern, but I can't ride a camel in Nashville. So I thought, hey, why not? And so we stop off, and this roadside zoo, the only way I know to describe this so that most of you are going to understand is it was Joe Exotic. Okay, this thing had crocodiles and snakes, and there were giraffes, there were a lion, there was all kinds of stuff that you could see and touch and pet and ride. And so we rode the camel, and then the guy that was there, he goes, hey, you want to hold a snake? And I was like, I don't know. I typically try to social distance myself from snakes. And he's like, no, it's good. So I've got this picture of me with a snake, and so he goes, let me show you some other things. And so we go inside, and there's like an aquarium, and there's these tanks with various animals. And so in there was a black mamba. So I got to see that, which was really cool. But then there was something off to the side that was kind of in an open container that my eye was drawn to. And it was these amazing looking frogs, and they were black and orange with these white spots. And it was like Nemo with 4 legs. It was the most beautiful frogs I've ever seen. And so I'm kind of navigating my way toward this little case, and as I get closer, I go to kind of reach and touch the frog, and the guy goes, no, don't touch. I was like, hold up, man, I just touched a snake. Like, what's the big deal? He goes, no. He said, these are poison dart frogs. And I went, poison frog? He goes, yeah, they're very poisonous, and they could kill you if they were to excrete that venom on you. And I was like, really? And so sure enough, I just kind of trusted him, backed up, and let it go. Well, sure enough, I go and look these things up later, and there are poison frogs. And what I thought looked really cool, and to use a word that I'm going to use a lot today, I was seduced into by its beauty, into almost touching and not knowing that what I couldn't see had the potential to kill me. And I wonder if there are things in our lives that seduce us because they look a certain way into us having this feeling about it that feels like, you know what, I can dabble and I can touch it, I can be a part of it. But what we don't see behind is this thing that might just be the thing that kills us. We've been talking in this series about the difference between our body, this physical world, and our spiritual, our soul. And the thing that we've kind of said over and over is this, is that we are not a body with a soul. And we have to understand this in order to begin to tackle the things on the inside that do affect the outside, instead of just coming at everything from the outside or the physical. In fact, we're not a body with a soul, we're this. We are a soul with a body. And so we've got to take care of our soul. And if our souls are not guarded, we can be easily enticed or we can be seduced, especially in the arena of what we worship. The things that we give highest adoration to, the things that we elevate. You know, God knew this from the beginning. That's why when he was giving Moses the 10 Commandments, the very first thing out of the gate that he says in Exodus chapter 20, look what he says. He says, you shall have no other gods before me. He's saying, listen, you're going to be tempted, you're going to be enticed, you're going to be seduced by putting things, gods, we're going to talk about this in depth in just a second, but he says, don't put any other gods before me. He says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or the waters below. You shall not bow down to them and worship them. It's like God knew that our heart was going to be drawn toward these things that we worship. So, you know, why are our souls so tempted? Why are our souls so vulnerable to being seduced? Well, here's why. Because we are created to worship. We are created for worship. It's a part of our DNA. Let me put it this way. Worship is not something we do. Worship is something that we are. It is deeply embedded in us. It is interwoven into our very being. We are created for this. It's a part of who we are. We're created to be worshipers. And so what happens is we will find something that will fulfill that need, that will fill that space. And so anytime that we're not focused on worshiping the true God, the living God, here's what will happen. Just like that frog, we're going to be drawn to something else. We're going to be drawn to something that is counterfeit. And before you know it, we'll end up in a place of worship. Now, even if you don't call yourself religious, let's take that out of it for a second. Let's just talk about how this looks in real life. Even if you don't call yourself religious, you know what this looks like. Worship being this feeling or being this expression of deep adoration. You know what this looks like. I remember in 2012, I was in New Orleans for the NCAA Final Four, which I have missed terribly this year. I just love March Madness, and being a UK fan, I get to witness March Madness much deeper than most of you do. And so our teams typically run. So in 2012, we made a run all the way to the Final Four. So Lori and I and several friends, we went down to New Orleans to celebrate Kentucky being in the Final Four. Well, sure enough, if you know anything about that, we ended up winning that tournament. So I'm sitting there, and right before my eyes in this arena, the Superdome there, we got to see our team cut down the nets. And you know what I saw? I wouldn't put this word on it at the time, but I saw people deeply adoring. I saw people who were expressing in a very, very real, I can't explain it other than almost a spiritual way. I saw worship happening. And again, it's a weird word to put with it, but if you look at what was happening, there were these moments where worship was beginning to happen in that place, and it spilled off into the streets, that people were drawn to this feeling and expression of deep and high elevation. So we know what worship looks like. We do it in all different kinds of ways. We see people do it in all different kinds of ways. And the reason why is because we're created that way. We're created to have these moments of deep worship. But here's what I've learned. 2012 is a distant memory now. Oh yeah, and I can kind of recollect on some of the great things, but I can't put myself emotionally and physically back in that place. And so what happens over time is these moments or these things fade, all the things. They fade and they leave us where we started, somewhat empty. There's just a void. And because we are created to worship by God and for God, we've got to make sure that we focus in on that. That's why he includes this in his commandments. I love how it was put in Deuteronomy chapter 4. He kind of even spells it out a little bit more. He says, do not corrupt yourselves by making an idol. Okay, that's something that we put in place of God. It's something that is a marker for what it is that we adore or deeply desiring to show expression for. He says, don't put an idol in any form. And then he kind of explains, here's a few options that you might include in it. Whether it's a man or a woman, an animal on the ground, a bird in the sky, a small animal that scurries along the ground, or a fish in the deepest sea. And when you look up into the sky and see the sun, moon, and stars, all forces of heaven, and I love this, he says, don't be what? Seduced into worshiping them. There's a sense that anything and everything has the possibility of emotionally and spiritually penetrating our soul where we will be seduced into worshiping them. Now, this is a little foreign for us. When we read Deuteronomy, it's like, who's going to really worship a small animal that scurries along the ground or a fish in the deepest sea? And so what we have to understand is that when he's talking about idols or idolatry, these things look different culture to culture. Yeah, in the old culture, you would have things like golden calves, and you would have maybe a cedar pole. You've seen those, like a totem pole or cedar pole that would represent these idols of worship. Or maybe, it was nature. And so we don't battle these things. And so when we read Deuteronomy 4, we go, well, that's not a big deal. I guess I'm free from idolatry. I'm free from idols. I would never go and worship a fish. I would never go and worship a tree. I would never worship the sun. So these things are a little foreign to us. But if we begin to look in our culture and unfold those things, guys, there's idols all around us. They just look different. Sports is an idol. Tech, our phones, just having to be sucked into a screen can become an idol. Or sex, or our closets, recreation, our stomachs. And so what happens then is our altars become arenas. Our altars become our iPhones. It's that moment where I'm constantly looking on my phone, or I'm sucked into binge watching hours and hours and hours and hours of TV, and I set before that idol. Or maybe it's buffets or shopping. But those become our altars. Those become our arenas where our hearts are drawn. And if we're not careful, what happens, just like in Deuteronomy, we are seduced into worshiping them, and we may not even know it. We don't see it. We don't think about it in this way. And so we've been seduced into taking some good things. These are good things. But we have been seduced into taking good things, and get this, and here's where it crosses, and we elevate them to supreme things. We take good things, and we are seduced into elevating them to supreme things. And before we know it, maybe sometimes without even knowing it, we have elevated them to a place above God in our hearts and deep in our souls. I think that's what Jesus had in mind when he asked the question in Mark chapter 8. What good is it if someone gains the whole world, yet forfeits their soul? So here's what we're going to spend our time on, and this is where it's going to get tough. How do we begin to dethrone these things that have taken over the thrones of our hearts? How do we dethrone the idols? How do we dethrone these things that have seduced us into elevating them into these places of supremacy? And this is weighty, but we got to work through this. Number one, I think the first thing that we have to do in order to begin this process, we have to identify our idols. We have to identify them. We got to call them out. We got to look and see, what is it right now that has become an elevated place or an elevated thing in my life? Psalm 24, he says, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? Here's what he's asking. He says, who is it that gets or is allowed access into the presence of God? And I don't know about you, I want to be in the presence of God. So he's going to describe who it is that gets to or is allowed into that place. And here's what he says. The one who has clean hands and pure heart, who does not trust, look at this, in an idol or swear by a false god. It's, hey, you want to know who it is that's going to ascend the mountain of the Lord, or who's going to be able to be in that holy place? He says it's those with clean hands, pure hearts, who are not seduced, what? By idols. Guys, this is some serious stuff. I don't know about you, but I want to be able to stand in the presence of God. I want to be in God's holy place. I want to be covered, and I want to be just, I want to be in that space where God is in. And so I've got to kind of look at this. And so, and I want you to hear me out on this. Guys, we can take interest in stuff. We can like stuff. We can collect stuff. We can love sports. We can love all of these things, and we can participate in them. Here's what we can't do. We can't elevate them to a place that is a supreme place that God and God alone created us to be in communion and in contact with Him. It's this place of worship. So how do I begin to identify these things? Let me give you three quick things. Here's kind of the three to start with. If you want to know what it is that you have elevated, look where your time goes, look where your money goes, and look where your conversation goes. Your time, your money, and your conversation. Where do you spend your time? When you look at your calendar, what are those things that are in bold, that are non-negotiables, that show up regularly and often? And it doesn't matter what calls or who calls or what is needed, any of those kinds of things, you are on that spot. You're not going to get rid of it. It's always going to be on your calendar. And then ask, at what point does it cross the threshold of being elevated to supreme? What is it that not just in time physically, but how about mentally? That mental space, how much time do you give to something? And then look at your money. Does your money tend to kind of drift in a similar direction a lot? Is it, I begin to trace and go, man, I spend a lot of money here. Oh, and then if you kind of add this in, that's it. And so where is it that your money tends to drift and navigate? Your resources, your financial, but also your blessings of time and space. And where do those things begin to drift? And then your conversations. It's the things you talk about. Guys, I know people all the time where I can guarantee it that within 10 minutes of having a conversation with somebody, the conversation is going to drift to this topic, this subject, because that's where their heart is passionate. And so their mind goes to that space, and before you know it, their mouth is talking about that space, and the conversations always go back to those things. And so what is it that your time and your money and your conversation tends to circle? Let me give you a few examples of this. For some of us, it's our homes. Man, we put so much time and space and money and conversation about our homes. It is Chip and Joanna Gaines on steroids. And we got to make sure that it's perfect and it's well kept and it smells right and it can photograph right. And so our homes consume us. For some of us, it's our image. Man, we spend so much time and so much money and so much conversation about our image and going to the mall and making sure that we look right, making sure that our bodies are right, making sure that our face is right, and making sure that the filter on the phone is right so that we give the right image. And so our image takes over for some of us, and I'm going to tread lightly. Some of it's our family. And you go, whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, family is everything. And you're right. It's absolutely, but it's those places where do we begin to elevate our family, our kids, and other things over God, hobbies, social media influence. Guys, there's so much that fit into these categories. And so what is it that we begin to put ahead of God? Anything that gets put ahead of God, elevated to that supreme place, is an idol. Can I be honest with you? Here's a couple of my idols. Just so you think that I'm not sitting in a place where I'm talking at you today. Over this last year, I have identified one of my major idols, and I didn't even know it was an idol. I didn't even know how detrimental to my soul that it was. Here's my number one idol: being liked. Being liked. I have this drawn, I don't know how to describe it other than I am seduced into thinking that everything I do, everything I say, everything I am has to be approved by everyone that I'm in the company with at the moment. And so being liked, I worried. I worried about, is everybody that I teach on a Sunday going to like me? And everybody that I hang out with here going to like me? And over here, I got to make sure that everybody likes me. And so I got to this place where everything revolved around, am I liked? But here's what God is beginning to tear down in my life and dethrone in my life. I can't live into my calling as a pastor. I can't live into my calling as a teacher. I can't live into my calling as a husband if I'm concerned about being liked, because it's not realistic. And so what ends up happening is I end up in this space where I'm occupied by being liked, and meanwhile, I'm not being able to live into what I've been created to be and who I've been created to be. And so God is tearing down those things. I'm bad about setting up idols of entertainment and recreation and hobby. I'm a shopaholic. I love to shop, and there are moments that, the next pair of Jordans or the next pair of Yeezys are the thing that occupies my space and my time and my money, and I begin to elevate those things into areas of supreme. And so we all have these idols, and so identifying them has to be where we begin, and we have to be really honest in this. Things that I give more of my heart to than I should. Not bad things, but things that I begin to give more of my heart to than I should. And I begin to identify them and elevate them to supreme. And so we have to identify. So after I begin to identify those things, then I got to go to work. And so simply put, we've got to tear down our idols. So we identify them and go, okay, here they are. Now I'm going to begin to tear those down. Now I want you to know, I'm not talking about managing them. God is not asking us to manage our idols. He's not asking us to tolerate them on the side or split time or split custody of our heart. He's saying, no. The expectation here is to get rid of them. The expectation here is to get out the old spiritual sledgehammer and begin to go to work on these things. I love what God told Gideon in the midst of people who were worshiping all kinds of idols. And here's what he says in Judges 6. He says, the same night the Lord said to him, so the Lord comes to Gideon and he says, here's what I want you to do. Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that's 7 years old. Here's what he's saying. Get out the heavy equipment. I want you to get that big, strong, mature old bull, because here's what we're going to do. We're going to tear down your father's altars to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. He says, we're going to get the bull and we're going to begin to bulldoze. We're going to tear down the idols. We're going to send a clear message to the people that, there is one true God. There is one God who is to be elevated into the supreme place. And we're going to completely destroy. We're going to completely just decimate anything that stands in the way. It's this sense that nothing gets to stand. It's this sense that nothing should be left standing, Gideon. Or, hey, nothing gets to stand, Jason, between me and you, says the Lord. And this moment, if we're not careful, again, we're seduced in this area. We think, again, we can just manage these things. So I can manage my time better and kind of split it, or I can manage my money better, or I can manage my presence better. And it's kind of like this. It's this concept where we begin to I'm doing it for the good of my family. And so if I'm not there all the time and I'm too focused on money, I'm at least focused on it for a good reason, when maybe what it is most, your kids need you at home, but you have seduced yourself into thinking, but if I spend 80 hours a week over here and I make more money, then my kids benefit more, my family benefits more, my wife benefits more. And so again, that's just one example of how these things begin to get into this space where we begin to manage it. And I think the Lord sometimes needs to call us into this space where we go, hey, go get the 7-year bull. Let's begin to tear down some things. Let's begin to really destroy some things that have been elevated to this place of supreme for far too long. We've been seduced, and this is why our lives are so full, but yet our souls are so empty. I'm convinced that some of us live with these empty spaces in our souls, but yet we have a life full of things. Jesus ran across a guy, and he's encountering this. It's a guy who wants to do right, but he wants to have a relationship with God, but he also wants to manage these idols that he set up. And so in Mark chapter 10, Jesus looks at this guy, and here's what he says. He looked at, and I love this, Jesus looked at him and he loved him. Jesus was drawn to him. Jesus adored him in a way. He says, listen, I love you. And he says, I'm going to tell you how much I love you. Here's what you need to do. One thing you lack, he said, go and sell everything and give it to the poor, and you will have treasures in heaven. Then come follow me. And I know this sounds crazy because we think, or we have been seduced into thinking or believing that Jesus would never say this to us. I mean, we have created this Jesus where we like to live with a Jesus who we believe would never say no. Or we live with this concept of Jesus where he would never tell me to not do something. He would never ask this of me today. I mean, we think that Jesus wants us to have whatever we want and do whatever we want and be whoever we want as long as we get all the feels. And maybe there are things that Jesus wants us to have, and he's okay with us having. And there are things he wants us to experience that are good, but he says you can't make those things an idol. See, he gets to the heart of the matter. He knows that this guy's problem is my problem. Is that if these things don't go left, if these things go left unchecked, they become idols. And so I just wonder, I was looking around this week, and I've been looking for weeks now and months now as I've been kind of through a journey myself, and I go, what would Jesus ask me to tear down? What would he ask me to leave behind? What would he ask me to walk away from? What would he ask me to spend less time on and money on and talk about less? And I want you to hear this. It's not that Jesus doesn't want us to have nice things. He doesn't want nice things to have us. And that's what he's telling this man. That's what he's telling us. Listen, I'm okay with you having nice things. The problem is those nice things have you. They have captured you. They're holding your soul captive. Guys, I was with a pastor friend a while back, and we were doing lunch. And when I say a while back, I'm not talking like 2002 a while back. I'm talking about within the last year. So we sat down at lunch, and he puts his phone, as many of us have a habit, he puts his phone on the table, and he immediately notices that the phone is there, so he grabs it and puts it in his pocket. And I went, whoa, 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 whoa. I said, is that a flip phone? I was like, it's not 2000. Like, why do you have a flip phone? He said, yeah. He said, sorry, I didn't even mean to put it on the table. And I said, okay, you're not answering my question. Why do you have a flip phone? So I was going to make fun of him for having a flip phone. I'm like, man, it's 2019. Why do you have a flip phone? And he said, I had to make a decision. I said, okay. He said, I had to switch from my smartphone to a flip phone because the smartphone had consumed me. And I wasn't able to be present in moments like this, or I would go home and I wasn't present with my family, or I wasn't present to even my church. I wasn't present. And so I had to make a decision. So I'm going to do this flip phone until God has somehow torn that out of me. And I went, wow. So I got out my phone and checked my email. No, I'm just kidding. But it was one of those moments where he was like, it had consumed me. It had me. And he said, I've got to tear it out. He goes, I don't know if I'll be 3 months with a flip phone or 6 months or 6 years with a flip phone, but until I begin to learn to be present, I've got to get rid of it. And I think there are moments where things become idols and we don't even realize it. And God says, you got to tear them down. You got to get rid of them. Now, here's what happens. When we do that, there's now space. When I identify my idols, I tear those things out, I bulldoze them out. There's now created space in my soul. So what do I do with that? Here it is. We begin to turn our souls toward Jesus. That we take that space that has been created by the identification and now the hard work of tearing some of those things out, we begin to turn that. We turn our souls toward Jesus. Let me just give you a series of things. I want you to help me out at home. Anytime you see an underline, just kind of say that out loud with me. But in Psalm 84, look at this. My soul yearns. Just let these, I want these words to rest on you this morning. It even faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh, look at this, cry out for the living God. Psalm 107 says this, for he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. In Psalm 42, he says, as the deer pants for streams of water, my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When can I go and meet with God? Look at the language that is used in connection with God and our souls. All of these have to do with the soul, but it's this language of longing. It's this language of yearning. It's thirsting. It's hungering. It's clinging. It's panting. My dogs have taken so many walks over the last 2 weeks. It's like 6 walks a day. And poor little Phoebe, a couple of days ago, she was just panting so hard. She was like, listen, can I just go lay back on the couch? And I looked at her and I thought of this verse and I thought, wow, when does my soul pant? I don't use this sort of language. When it comes to my relationship, we don't typically use this language, and we don't have these types of feels for Jesus. It's the living God. We yearn and thirst. We know what that looks like. We yearn and thirst and hunger for what? More stuff, more followers, more this or better that. And here's what all of these things are an indicator of. He's using this sort of language to call our attention to what it is that we would put this language toward, because he understands that that's an indicator of where have you been seduced. Where is it that your heart longs and clings to? Where is it that your money and your time and your conversation goes toward? What does it hunger for? What does it thirst for? What does it pant for? So guys, as we close this series down, as we close this morning down, I know this is tough because nobody wants to potentially have to go get a flip phone. Nobody wants to give up tickets and give up space and time and travel and all these kinds of things. And I don't believe Jesus would ask you to give those things up if they weren't on the thrones of our hearts. He only comes in and he says, listen, you've got to get rid of something because it's occupying supreme space. And so I pray that as tough as this is, as you begin to inventory what it is your heart is seduced toward, that God will get through. And I'm not praying this for you only. I'm praying this for me, that God, you will continue to pull down the idols of me being liked and me longing to be entertained and hobby and all the things. And here's why, because I don't want to settle any longer. I want to be in the space where God is. I want to be able to ascend the holy mountain. There's an old hymn that I want us to use to end with, and I want you to meditate on this and spend some time on YouTube and look up this song. There's an old hymn that I remember singing in my grandmother's church, and the old school. And it's turn your eyes upon Jesus. And that's what God is calling us to. Hey, just identify some things that have been elevated. Begin to tear those things down and then turn your eyes. See, the eyes are kind of a window to the soul, right? And so what I look at, what I spend time asphyxiating my eyes on, many times are the things that begin to elevate my life. And so I just want to encourage you to turn your eyes upon Jesus. Here's what he says. This song says, turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. And the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. I want to leave us with a moment to be still and just think about those words. Think about what it is that has occupied the spaces of our soul and what you'll do next in order to begin to tear those things down. I want you to open yourself up in just these next few seconds and say, God, I want you to start making some changes. I want you to begin to detox my soul. I want you to dethrone. And God, I want you to turn my eyes toward you. Father, I pray as we end this series, and we look forward to next week and Easter and the resurrection and the power that comes through your Son, that we will begin today turning our eyes toward him. God, I pray that we will look full in his wonderful face. We won't look out of the corner of our eye and make sure he's there while we continue to point our eyes toward what it is that we're constantly pursuing, but just occasionally checking our peripheral to make sure you're still there. That God, no, we turn our eyes toward your face fully. God, I pray as we do that, the things of earth will dim. They won't look so good. They won't seduce us. They won't look like this beautiful orange and black frog. It won't look like something that we can't live without. It won't look like things that we can't do without. But God, that it will begin to just be dim. It'll fade. Especially when we begin to put it next to the light of your glory and grace. So Father, will you do this? Will you tear down the idols? It's such a hard thing and a hard concept because it means we have to give up something. But God, I know that as we give up things, you will begin to occupy the space in our hearts and in our souls that you created for you. God, we're going to worship something. I pray that we can turn our hearts and our souls toward what it is that we were created to worship, what this need and this desire was created for, and who it was to be occupied for, and that's you. So God, help us to elevate you more. Help us to love you more. Help us to yearn and long and desire and pant for you more. And in doing so, God, you will begin to bring life from the inside to our outside. And so that, God, we will live in this body with a healthy soul. That God will be able to not only live in peace under the grace and love of your reign, but God, we'll begin to change communities. We'll begin to change our cultures. We'll begin to change things for the better, and it will be kingdom. We're so grateful for the opportunity to even be called into your holy space. So, Father, I pray that as these challenges come, that our conversations with you will engage us and will encourage us and will encapsulate us in ways that only you can. We thank you. We love you. We pray this through your Son's name. Amen. You guys have a great week. We'll see you next week for Easter.
Thank you again so much for joining us this morning. And just a few things before we go. Coming up this Sunday is Easter. And if you haven't already registered for your Easter box, we need you to do so by April 7th. And you can do that at the link below. And for our partners, we want to continue to be wildly generous. And we need your help to do so. So please continue to give at the links below. And lastly, in this crazy time, we all need to stay connected on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So stay connected with us and stay connected with each other. It's what we really need right now. Thanks everybody and have a great week.